So I like to think of the task of parenting like teaching a child how to ride a bike. I like to think of the task of parenting like teaching a child how to ride a bike. When my dad taught me to ride a bike, he brought home a bike one day from, I think, a thrift store and put me on it, and he held the back and he held the steering wheel and he just wheeled me around. It didn't have training wheels. I suppose, maybe the training wheel thing changes this analogy a little bit, but even if you put a little kid on a bike with training wheels, initially they don't know what to do. They don't know what to do. They don't know where their feet go. They don't know where their hands go. They grab different things. Their feet are flailing. Balance is an issue. And so initially, you have to do everything for them. Initially, you're the one holding them up. You're the one balancing. You're the one saying, put your hands here. No, not on my neck. Not there. There we go. Keep your hands there. Good. Now put your feet on the pedals, right? Now, they don't know how to pedal. You got to teach them how to pedal. You got to teach them everything. And so think of children when they're very young, say the first 5 years or so, you have to do everything for them. They don't know what they're doing, and so you have to do everything for them. This is how God has designed it. Then at some point, they kind of start getting some of the hang of it. They know where their hands go. They're old pros on putting hands on the handlebars. Maybe they get their feet on the pedals for most of the time. Maybe they get a little bit of balance, but they're not quite so good at that. They got to remind them which way to pedal. No, not that way. This way. There's some course corrections, but they're starting to get the hang of it. These middle years, think of sort of the elementary years. Your children are beginning to make some choices, make some decisions on their own, but they've got lots of guidance, lots of correction, lots of hovering still during those elementary years. Later, finally, as follow the analogy, they're beginning to get a hang of it. I remember my dad he would let go of the handlebar. He was still holding on the back, but he started letting me steer. He was still controlling, and I'm sure that if I was about to go down, he grabbed. But you start letting go, and then at some point, he said, all right, son, I'm going to let go. And you can do this, you can do this. And so he'd get momentum, and he'd let go, and you go, right? And he'd run over, grab me, pick me back up again, brush me off. Good job. That was great. Let's do it again. Ready? Let's go. And he'd get me going again, and then he'd let me go again. And you do that 4 or 5 times or more. And then at some point, he let go, and I went. It was wobbly. It was not pretty, but I went. And I want you to think of those years. That's high school. Sorry, high schoolers. That's what you're like. But the idea is what you want is you want to begin it. You're launching your kids. You're launching them, and so they're beginning to act independently. You want them to act independently. You want them making choices, beginning to make more and more choices on their own. They're not always great. They're not always good. They're figuring things out. But you want them doing that with you there. You don't want that. You don't want to have been hovering until they're 18 and then good luck, right? At some point. The goal ought to be that at some time in late high school, you tell your child that they're free to do whatever they want in Christ. That ought to be your goal. Somewhere late high school, you say, hey, I know you got a year or so left here. Hopefully maybe a little bit longer, depending, especially our daughters. But, technically speaking, if you're going to move on, you could. And so I want you to know you're free in Christ. Do as you please, honor Christ. And what you're doing at that point is you're letting go and you're saying, I want them to make those first turns in my cul-de-sac. I want them to make those first turns in my cul-de-sac. Are they going to have some spills? Yeah, most likely. And I want to be there to run over and say, how's it going? Are they getting up? Are they dusting themselves off? Are they getting back on the bike on their own? Good job. I want to cheer them on, maybe offer a suggestion. But that's the idea. They're beginning to act independently, and you want to get to that point where you can say, you're free. You're free in Christ. Now, the central principle that I'm using in this analogy, and it is found in our text, is that training has a trajectory. Training has a trajectory. When you got the bike for your 5-year-old, the plan was not to walk around with them behind their bike forever. Right? The plan is to let them go. The plan is to see them buzz off down the driveway and out down the street to see their friends. The plan is independence.